Tonight, happy Wednesday. It seems like ancient history now, but in the fall of 2021, not so long ago, America's supply chains came close to snapping. Remember this? More than 100 cargo ships were floating idly off the coast of LA and Long Beach. Those are the two biggest ports on the West Coast. Those ships were filled with consumer goods bound for stores and consumers across the country, but they couldn't offload them. There's no place to do it. The containers just sat there. And in any case, thanks to the Biden administration's vaccine mandates, there weren't enough truckers to pick up the cargo and take it anywhere. So all of that combined to create the worst shipping bottleneck in memory, and it lasted for months. The price of transporting goods to this country rose by 600%. So if you're wondering why inflation started to go up, that's a big part of the reason. Now, none of this happened by accident. The bottleneck was a man-made disaster. And it could have been, should have been, fixed by the people in charge of transportation. They're called the Department of Transportation. But for much of the time this disaster was unfolding, Joe Biden's Secretary of Transportation, that would be Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, was completely disengaged. He wasn't on the job. He was at home. He was on paid paternity leave, posing for selfies for social media. Now, Buttigieg didn't seem embarrassed at all by this. "This is work," he said, though in fact he had played no role whatsoever in giving birth to a child. Quote, "It may be time away from a professional role, but it's very much time on." And actually it was time on television. Pete Buttigieg used his time to appear on various shows, including The View on ABC, where he spoke at length about his favorite subject, which is himself. Not the container disaster, me. Meanwhile, the ships stacked up outside the ports and inflation went up. So that should conclusively have been the end of Pete Buttigieg's career as transportation secretary. Back to McKinsey for you. Whatever you think of his personal journey of self-discovery, there was an emergency in progress and Buttigieg ignored it. If anything is grounds for firing somebody, it's that. But the Biden administration did not fire Pete Buttigieg. They did the opposite. They praised him for breaking some important but not very well-defined glass ceiling of some sort that you're supposed to be excited about. They rewarded his dereliction of duty. So because people do respond to incentives, Pete Buttigieg kept doing it. He kept proudly ignoring his job. Weeks after a train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, causing an actual environmental disaster throughout the whole region, Pete Buttigieg, as of tonight, has still not visited East Palestine. Why? What has he been doing? Well, as he explained to a Daily Caller reporter last night, he's taking more personal time.
What do you have to say to the folks in Ohio, East Palestine, who are suffering right now?
Well, I'd refer you to about a dozen interviews I've given today, and if you'd like to arrange a conversation, be sure to reach out to our press office, but I'm not going to have that conversation with you. Just walking.
You don't have a message for them?
I do, and I shared it with the press many times today. I'd refer you to those comments.
Would you mind sharing it with us?
No, I'm going to refer you to the comments that I made to the press because right now I'm taking some personal time and I'm walking down the street.
Are you going down there?
What's that?
Are you going down there at all?
Yep, I am.
When are you going?
I'll share that when I'm ready.
Okay,
I'm talking on the
thank you.
street. Can I get a photo of me?
I'm taking some personal time, not just a robot, but a nasty one. Could I get a photo of you? And then he did. Now you wonder what Pete Buttigieg is going to do with that photo. Makes you shiver a little bit if you think too much about it, so we're going to stop. Meanwhile, outside Mayor Pete's nifty little cocoon of bistros and Instagram selfies, life goes on in America, and in many places it is getting tougher. Not that he cares, even a little bit. Here's the mayor of East Palestine on February 16th, nearly 2 weeks after the derailment, explaining that he'd heard nothing from Pete Buttigieg. Watch. That was last week. He still didn't go. This week, people in East Palestine are coughing up blood. We know that because we talked to a couple of them last night. But still, Pete Buttigieg has not shown up. Donald Trump has, by the way. He went today. He's not able to fix the problem. It's not like he's the Secretary of Transportation. But Trump did bring pallets of bottled water and then bought the entire fire department dinner at McDonald's. Whatever you think of Trump, at least he cared enough to go there. That's something. In fact, it's enough to make you wonder how someone who clearly doesn't care at all, not even a little bit, who doesn't even care enough to pretend he cares, wound up with one of the most important jobs in the Biden cabinet, a job with actual responsibilities. How did he do that? Well, we know what the answer is. No, Pete Buttigieg doesn't know anything about transportation. We would bet money he can't drive a stick shift. On the other hand, Pete Buttigieg is gay, he plays the piano, and he speaks Norwegian. Let's hire him. Watch.
There he was yesterday, front and center, now third in the polls with a speech that many have said are historic.
He's inspirational so far, and that's something that voters absolutely want.
He has this appeal for a lot of reasons. He is a veteran. He is openly gay. He is from Indiana.
You are a concert pianist. Yeah. You speak many languages, including Norwegian, that you learned because you wanted to read a book.
The second coming of Obama, huh? We'll see about that. My prayers may have been answered if that's true.
The draw to this point has been young, fresh, positive, and a change agent.
This guy is chicken soup for my soul.
So you sort of long to see Pete Buttigieg fired from his job. It's nothing personal. Aren't many people who hate Pete Buttigieg. What Pete Buttigieg is actually like, or how well his Norwegian actually is irrelevant. You long to see him fired because you long to see someone at some point held accountable for disasters. When the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan and armed the Taliban with one of the largest militaries in the entire region, no one was punished. The only person in the U.S. military that we're aware of who was punished for that debacle was the guy who complained about it. That's it. No one was ever punished for COVID, when it turns out the vaccines didn't do what they told us they were going to do. When the lockdowns hurt more people than they helped. When Fauci was caught lying about virtually everything, not one person was punished. So it would be encouraging to see someone punished for this debacle, for the 1,000 train derailments we have every year, as Pete Buttigieg blithely informed us the other day. But Pete Buttigieg has not been fired, and he likely won't be. Why is that? Well, we're thinking it's because he's on board with the core idea of the Biden administration, and that is equity. And equity means we're going to make decisions based on how you look. And Pete Buttigieg is all in on that. Watch him explain that actually all lives don't matter.
In 2015, you said that all lives matter when you spoke about two police controversies that were happening in South Bend. Was that a mistake?
What I did not understand at that time was that phrase, just early into especially 2015, was coming to be viewed as a sort of counter slogan to Black Lives Matter. And so this statement that seems very anodyne and something that kind of nobody could be against actually wound up being used to devalue what the Black Lives Matter movement was telling us. Since learning about how that phrase was being used to push back on that activism, I've stopped using it in that context.
Imagine apologizing for saying all lives matter. No, they actually don't all matter, says the head of the Department of Transportation. And you can see now that he means it. A train derails on his watch in a town full of high school educated Trump voters who nobody cares about and have been left behind, and they are further ignored. But that's not environmental racism. No, it's equity. So clearly, he knows all lives don't matter, and he's being rewarded for it. Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and joins us tonight to assess. Professor, thanks for coming on. Wouldn't it be nice to see somebody pay some price for ineptitude and indifference?
Yeah, it would. He's jumped the proverbial shark, though. He's the epitome of the empty resume class. I mean, his only qualifications for the job were his identity politics credentials and the fact he went to Harvard and Oxford, and the media and the bi-coastal elite gaga over him. But otherwise, Tucker, he had the un-Midas touch. Everything he's touched, whether it was the port crowding at our major ports, or the train robbing of trains going into the ports, or these recent 4 accidents where airliners almost crashed, or the Southwest implosion, or the whole meltdown during the holiday season of our airline system, or these rail car, everything he either ignores or he offers these platitudes. And how ironic that right on the eve, or right in the midst, I should say, of this tragedy in East Palestine, of this white working class tiny community with an income average income about $45,000. He was lecturing the nation that white hard hats don't look like the community they are working in, and that's not true. It's not only that is he pandering, but he's often inaccurate and ignorant. Here in California, most of the construction workers you see on the elite coast are Hispanic, and most of the residents are white upper class people. That's just the way America works. But he always tries to, in lieu of actually doing something, he always tries to have a rhetorical or an abstract victory. And I think people finally just feel, they're tired of him. And he's afraid. He talks very bold and like he's bold and he's dynamic, but he's very cowardly because he's afraid to go in and confront these people and tell them why that FEMA wasted 2 weeks before they addressed their concerns and why he hasn't been there. And we know the reason is that he doesn't want to sit there and talk to people when they ask him questions he can't answer. And so he's just sort of what this entire cabinet is, that this cabinet was either predicated on being an identity politics first in their field, so to speak, or they were candidates that pulled out and gave the nomination to Joe Biden. But otherwise, none of them had any demonstrable experience or expertise in the field that they were supposed to serve us, the people.
That's right. It's just a little bit funny. They've been lecturing us now for 2 years about something called environmental racism, and then there's an actual environmental disaster in the midst of a community of people who didn't vote for them, and they ignore it. That actually does look like environmental racism to me.
It is, and the reason is that East Palestine is right on the border of Pennsylvania, and it's in Klinger. It's the very area that in 2008 Barack Obama blasted as they cling to their religion. And then we know how Joe Biden has called Trump supporters chumps and dregs, and we know the irredeemables and deplorable vocabulary of Hillary Clinton. So they have a long record of disparagement of the white working class. I don't know why they think they can just get away with it so easily without some kind of reaction, but it is racist. And if this was in Malibu, or this was in Martha's Vineyard, or even in Compton or South Central, there would be an immediate U.S. government response by this administration.
Right. Among the rich or the fashionable poor, but these people fall through the cracks, right?
Yeah,
every single time. Vic Chavis-Hansen joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as we said, the Biden administration has effectively done nothing to respond to an actual environmental disaster. Donald Trump, by contrast, visited the town today, and he bought a lot of McDonald's for cleanup crews and for firemen. He handed out bottled water, including Trump water. Trump also thanked John Rourke of the Blue Line Moving Company for bringing water to people who live there. Watch.
And I want to thank those of you that helped John Rourke, who's fantastic, Blue Line Moving. Is John here? Hello, John. Good job. Got a lot of trucks coming up with water, right? That's true. You're a fantastic guy.
John Rourke with Blue Line Moving joins us right now. John, thanks so much for coming on. What did you see there? I'm embarrassed to say we have not been there, but what was your impression of what's happening in East Palestine?
My impression, Tucker, thanks for having me on, is that the folks there are a whole lot more motivated than they were at this time yesterday, and that's a fact. The fact that President Biden has refused to come to this small town when he's supposed to be Scranton Joe, a small town hero of the working man, and he can't even show his face in a town of American citizens that need his leadership, that need the government's help terribly. And he proved what everybody, I think, already knew in this country, is that he's not the leader for this country, and that Donald J. Trump is the leader that we all know he is, and he is the leader of this country. And he proved that today. That was leadership that I saw today. I saw people standing on the streets screaming for this man, chanting USA, USA. I mean, it just gives me goosebumps. And to have President Trump personally thank me, I mean, it almost brought me to tears, man, to be honest. I'm just a humble guy. I'm a working man, family man. And to be able to, have someone like him thank me personally was a big deal for me and my family.
I bet it was. So really, just kind of big picture for one second, since you were there. 2015, Trump emerges out of nowhere, then he becomes the nominee, and the media starts saying, wait, there are a lot of forgotten people in forgotten towns that built this country, people who were born here and have been completely ignored. Maybe we should pay some attention to these people who were dying younger than the rest of us. I don't think that ever happened. Did the people of East Palestine who you spoke to feel like anyone was paying attention to them in power?
Absolutely not. I mean, these people need help. Okay, well, we're putting illegal aliens in hotels and five-star accommodations in New York City, and the people of East Palestine can't even get a real hotel to stay in for a significant amount of time, or some real money that they can actually go maybe and get their own VRBO or something like that, somewhere where they can actually take a month and get away from the town and get away from breathing in that nasty air and having to see hundreds of workers. Every river, every tributary has hoses in it and aerators in it, and they're spraying water into these rivers, and who knows where the water's coming from. People don't have any idea what the hell is going on in their town right now in East Palestine. They have no idea, and that's because of people like Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden. They literally have no idea what they're doing, and that's why they're not there, because someone will call them out, and that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah. Those guys are very lucky that rural America is peaceful and law-abiding. They really are. Unlike a lot of cities that wouldn't put up with this for 1 second. John Rourke, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Tucker.
So, you know what a grand jury is. Everyone's heard of a grand jury, but who serves on a grand jury? Well, there's a grand jury impaneled looking into the former president, and the lead juror on that grand jury has just identified herself as such and gone on a media tour, and it turns out she's a full-blown lunatic. And we're not overstating that. We've got the tape. Whatever you think of Donald Trump, when he's unleashed in a crowd of people, he's pretty unbelievable. If you haven't seen the tape of him ordering at McDonald's in East Palestine, treat yourself. He wows everyone in the room. Again, you don't have to love Trump to know he's really good at this, and it's real. I mean, he feels it. That's why he's so good at it. So he's a huge threat. But in a normal country, in a democracy, you would let voters decide whether they want him to run the country again. But no! Partisan prosecutors at all levels, state and federal, are trying to prevent him from running for president again. Everyone knows this, no one ever says it, but it's true. It's happening. In Fulton County, Georgia, for example, prosecutors have a grand jury going, and they've put a self-described witch on it. This is the grand jury investigating Trump for election interference. In other words, for complaining about what was clearly an unfair election. Now, this person is called Emily Kors. She is the foreperson of the jury, and she posts online about different spells she can cast. CNN just interviewed her. How'd it go? We'll let you assess. Watch.
It's not a short list.
Not a short list. More, I mean, when it comes to 75 witnesses, like, it's not, I assume, of course, it's not 75 people. Would you characterize it as 20-ish people?
I can't say I counted.
Okay. More than a dozen, though, I think I'd heard you say in another interview?
I believe so. I'd be interested to know.
I'm sure we will hear more from him after after it all comes out.
I will be happy as long as something happens.
Yeah, just a jury of your peers, guaranteed by the Constitution. Charlie Hurt is the opinion editor of the Washington Times. He joins us now. I mean, I didn't even know this was allowed. I didn't know the foreperson, whatever that is allowed to do CNN interviews while the grand jury is still in panel, or doesn't this? What do you make of this? I'll stop. What's your take on this?
And she was picked by the other jurors to be the foreperson. So I'd hate to see the rest of the juries. You know, this woman, she's a lunatic, obviously, as you point out. But she's, you know, this is kind of what you get with America on TikTok. This is, to her, this is all a big social media thing. And the fact that she's, and not to mention, of course, these things, you know, grand juries are supposed to be done in secret. She's obviously blown through all of that, but it does sort of raise all kinds of questions. Well, gee, what else is going on in secret if this is the sort of thing that you wind up with? But if nothing else, she's a poster child for why we should only allow people who have jobs and pay taxes sit on juries. And she's also a poster child for avoiding online dating.
Well, that is absolutely true, and I'm not going to take the bait on that, Charlie. But let me just affirm my agreement with it. But really quick, big picture, what's going on here is Democrats are using the legal system to stop a presidential candidate from running for president. Now, you don't have to love Trump, or it doesn't matter. If you believe in our system and wanted to continue, you should be outraged, hair on fire, angry about this, but no one's saying anything, so far as I can tell.
Well, that's the real serious side of all of this. You know, she's ridiculous, and it's easy to make fun of her. But if you know, think about this. Think if this was an actual serious case, and think if you had actual serious adult prosecutors prosecuting a serious case, and you were the person that was facing your life in jail, and you looked up into the jury box and you saw this lunatic sitting in the jury box. These people make a mockery of everything we stand for. And I would argue, in a lot of ways, even more important than voting in this country is the concept of a jury of your peers. You can't be railroaded by a bunch of people who aren't like you, who don't come from your society. And the idea that you would have a grand jury with people like this on it makes a mockery of all of that.
That's exactly right. I mean, that could be you. That is absolutely right. And I hope people think about that. Even people who don't like Trump, think about that. We're breaking too much. Charlie Hurt, thank you.
Great to see you.
So one of the scariest examples of disintegration is the collapse of safety standards in commercial aviation. And that is absolutely real. We're going to tell you a story after the break about equity's effect on safety. And it's scary, and hopefully people will wake up and do something about it. We'll be right back. Was born in 1974 in the tiny Caribbean nation of Antigua, and by every account, he was an outstanding person. Conrad was the leader of the family, said his brother. We all looked up to him. Aska was certainly a man of deep religious faith, and we know that because his final words in the second before his death were, quote, "Lord, you now have my soul." Imagine saying that as your final sentence. But his death is a scandal. The reason he died is a scandal, and many in the aviation industry know about it, but it is never mentioned in public. So we thought we would tell you because there are lessons in his death for all of us who travel commercially. In February of 2019, Aska was the first officer piloting an Amazon Prime cargo jet for a contractor called Atlas Air. They were flying a Boeing 767. As it approached Houston Airport, Aska assumed full control of the plane. Seconds later, while attempting to apply the speed brakes to land, Aska accidentally pressed a switch that put the plane into go-around mode. And that gave the plane an unexpected jolt of thrust. In response to this unexpected jolt, Aska panicked. Instead of checking his instruments to figure out what was going on, he pushed down hard on the control yoke. He pushed as hard as he could. And then the plane nosedived through the clouds and right into the water. The plane was obliterated on impact. It killed him, his co-pilot, and another pilot who was just hitching a ride. So it was obvious from those facts alone that Conrad Aska, decent man though he was, should not have been in control of an airplane. And his personnel records confirm that strongly. Before he started flying 767s for Amazon and Atlas Air, he had been a pilot for 7 different airlines, including Mesa Airlines. Several instructors at Mesa reported that Aska was often overwhelmed in the cockpit, as he was on the day he died. One pilot later told the NTSB that in emergencies, Aska, quote, became extremely anxious and would start pushing a lot of buttons without thinking about what he was pushing, just to be doing something. To be clear, for a pilot, that can be deadly, and it was. Atlas Air says it was not aware of any of this when it hired Aska. But once he arrived at Atlas Air, Aska was so deficient in the simulator that all pilots have to train on that the company had to restart simulator training just for him. All of his other classmates had graduated. Predictably, in its final report into the Atlas Air crash, the NTSB cited as a cause of the deadly crash the, quote, systemic deficiencies in the aviation industry's selection and performance measurement practices, which failed to address the first officer's aptitude-related deficiencies and maladaptive stress response. By the way, those are things that all airlines and the military screen for and have since aviation began. And Aska's family, who lost their son and husband and brother, knew that. And so they have gone on to file several lawsuits against Atlas Air and Amazon for gross negligence, specifically for putting this man in the cockpit despite his obvious inability to fly an airplane. So why was he flying an airplane? Well, in his specific case, we do not have a definitive answer, but it seems pretty obvious. Airlines like Atlas Air, in fact, all the airlines, are doing their best to hire and retrain pilots on the basis of irrelevant criteria like their appearance. And your appearance, to restate, has nothing to do with your ability to fly an airplane or perform heart surgery or do anything. It's immaterial. But on their websites, both Amazon and Atlas Air explained that, quote, diversity is paramount in everything they do. Here's from the Atlas Air website, quote, we leverage diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as a business strategy and driver of innovation. We are guided by DEI philosophy. Oh yes, well, apparently you are. And look at the results. Amazon, of course, says the same thing. This is not an outlier. This is not just happening at Atlas Air. This is happening at every major carrier in the United States. Safety concerns ignored in favor of something called equity. Hiring by appearance, not by ability. This is insane. And in this case, it killed 3 people. United Airlines has promised that women and minorities. Right. Not the best pilots, but people who look a certain way. Well, as we told you, in December, a United Boeing 777 bound for San Francisco came within seconds of hitting the ocean. It just dropped out of the sky. And the pilots, who apparently were not properly trained or hired for the wrong reasons on the basis of irrelevant criteria, were sent back to training. Thankfully, the hundreds of people on that plane survived. But this kind of thing is happening across the industry. Talk to anyone who works there. Talk to any working pilot right now. The airlines are in a mad scramble to meet equity targets, meaning they are pushing safety aside in favor of ideology. And people will die. People have died. It's going to happen again. This should stop.